covering President Trump pulling ICE and federal agents from Minneapolis. This is a clearly measurable step by the Trump administration amid what have been ongoing protests and backlash that has overwhelmed them and their message. The announcement actually made by the very official that Trump sent to Minnesota after agents killed a protester and they wanted to change the so-called face of operations there, Tom H. Homan, stating that 700 agents are leaving now immediately. That is a measurable drawdown. We also want you to have the full picture. It still leaves about 2,000 agents there, which is unusual. This whole way that Trump has been putting ICE and DHS agents in these places has been unusual. And they are part of a larger force that we know has been drawing the protests over everything from the mass policing to the menacing of American citizens. Some agents caught on camera threatening people, threatening to punish First Amendment rights, the unprofessional and untrained tactics, and what you see on your screen, the 2 Americans slain, which has shocked the nation's conscience. So before I go any further, let me just tell you what the facts are here tonight. President Trump is reducing the forces there, that's a fact. And the Trump administration is publicizing it for a very PR-conscious president. That shows the impact of these protests and the pressure and this backlash, because there has been, at the political level, a failure by the administration to do what it so often does, to try to change the subject, replacing one outrage with another, with one topic with another. Trump has done that. That's one of his well-known media political tactics. Something that even his critics say with lament that he is effective at because he has been a reality show star, a self-promoter, an early Twitter adopter. Everybody knows how he does that, and it's failed here. So now, after all of this and those deaths and these other problems, the Trump administration is trying to shift both message and policy. And that means there can still be the usual exaggerations. As journalists, we try to fact-check and cover what's happening, but there is a shift. Activists warning the administration has a much more to do if it is going to actually respect the Constitution and public safety in Minnesota and elsewhere, which is why protesters are continuing on many efforts. There's now about 30,000 people in counting trained as constitutional observers. That's in that state alone. Across the country, this issue has become a focal point for the protests against Trump and the king-like efforts to search or patrol or police and even kill, all without the legal oversight that this country has long demanded, especially of federal government intrusions into what is usually local police tactics. The administration initially tried to ignore and criticize and even mock the many millions of Americans who turned out across this year, the second term. We've covered how some have folded like CEOs and read, while other groups, protesters, citizens on juries, many journalists have not been cowed. The approach is failing because the administration is now both, as I mentioned, in the drawdown and in its messaging, trying to at least say they're offering something back to those many millions of protesters. The Trump administration has reached a point where it does not want to risk looking like it cannot see any aspect of a problem that is before all of us, that Americans have seen across the political spectrum with their own eyes. Because when you see masked ICE agents menacing people as they've been caught on video killing Americans, and then a government lying about those videos, and then the government initially saying they wouldn't even investigate or have any rule of law for this. No, that's a problem people see. Drawing down several hundred agents who are a part of that is a way of saying, hey, we get it, even if people can debate whether they get it at all yet. Rachel Maddow has been reporting on the results from those protests, including halting the construction of new ICE centers. We are seeing continued rolling huge anti-ICE protests everywhere now. So these wonderful patriots have defeated the concentration camp. We're not leaving ICE out the door. My director of inspections, licenses, and permits revoked the building permit for this detention center. We're not leaving. Are they going to be able to build a huge permanent archipelago of camps, of lawless prison camps? There's pushback everywhere, including in red states, red counties, and red cities that says no. Pushback everywhere saying no. Pushback of huge measurable levels. Citizens also showing courage in places where we just watch agents kill their neighbors, even as CEOs and elites fold. Local officials using powers. We can take it off let's take off that video for a sec. I'm getting so many flashes. Local officials using powers that they have to thwart the ICE tactics in any way they can. As Rachel described there, this is still a country we have here. That means there's local officials. That means there's different power centers. There is federalism and there's capitalism, which sometimes is seen as going along with anything. But capitalism can also mean the public demanding rules, human rights, values, rule of law on the companies that they have any leverage for. Then we've reported on Democrats in D.C. who are in the minority, but are now trying new ways to protect the public from using that shutdown clash to taking testimony from witnesses in public, which we heard this week about these killings. That alone is powerful because the Trump DOJ has signaled that in some of these cases, it may not even bother fully investigating killings of Americans. So Democrats in that sad, obviously regrettable situation are not just writing letters criticizing it, but taking the testimony in public themselves. This is what people saw. This is how this killing went down. Here's the question about whether this person should still be walking around with a gun, making a salary from your tax dollars, let alone the more long-term legal question, which has to be investigated, whether anyone committed a crime pursuant to those Americans shot to death. I will tell you, an aggressive government can leave people feeling abused and hopeless. Politics sometimes, even as people are dying, can feel like it's viewed by many as a game with political hacks deliberately trying to leave people feeling powerless, like their voice doesn't matter. Like protest will be met with more of the very things that people are protesting, including government violence and abuse, something we've covered dates all the way back to earlier, uglier periods in our history. And yet, some of these activists are now seizing lawful, peaceful, and effective power. That's happening before our eyes with, as I mentioned, at least some measurable results without any indication that Trump has retracted the ICE agenda. I say that by way of introduction to a special guest tonight to start the program because we have a familiar beat guest, Jay Kanduri, an Obama campaign veteran, and Aru Shiny J, who directs the Sunrise Movement in Minneapolis, which has organized protests like this one we mentioned that pressures hotels to stop housing ICE agents, that pressures local businesses, that tries to have lawful direct action. And as we see on our cameras there, people at night trying to make sure their voices are also heard, even at a time where some of their neighbors were killed. Welcome to both of you. Aru, your thoughts on what works and what you say to people who do feel potentially dispirited, which I mentioned can be part of the agenda. Yeah, I mean, I think everything that we've seen in the last 3 weeks since Renee Good was first murdered is an incredible example of what organized people can do. We're at a point now where in Minneapolis, 5% of every single neighborhood is in a signal chat organizing to be able to respond to ISIS overreach. It's an incredible density. And what we've seen is that that network of ordinary citizens was basically able to force the US government to take a step back. To force the government back is an incredibly powerful thing. And it happened because of the density of organizing happening right now. It happened because, and you can hear this from Greg Bovino himself, it happened because his agents can't go anywhere without getting yelled at, getting blocked from the roads, getting noise outside the hotels they sleep at, getting refused service at restaurants. We're making it impossible for them to operate, and that is having success. Yeah. And you're doing that against the pushback and sometimes possibly illegal crackdowns. Just a couple headlines here. Homeland Security forcing tech companies to hand over data about Trump critics. There can be times where that's legal. There can definitely times where it violates the First Amendment, depending on the details. The DHS having these secretive subpoenas again around Americans. When we talk about sometimes now security letters or that being used against possibly foreign terror attacks, legally that's been allowed. Whether that can work against Americans in the long run once exposed is a big question. And you see local coverage in Maine. ICE demanding a Maine sheriff's employment records result after he criticized it, which shows you, as is often the case, when there's autocratic creep, someone who's devoted their life to being in law enforcement in Maine, learning very quickly that if you exercise First Amendment rights, sheriffs can obviously speak on these matters. There may be a DHS Trump crackdown. Your view of how your teams are fighting this, you can't minimize it and say it's not a risk, but how are you fighting it and sort of keeping spirits up? I mean, I think that something very beautiful was unleashed in the Twin Cities the last 3 weeks, this sense of solidarity of being on the same team. I think about the moment after Alex Pretty was killed, I drove out to a few blocks or the block where he was shot. And the minute that I got there, I saw this man getting tackled to the ground and having tear gas like sprayed at him. And a couple of us like pulled him up, and I remember grabbing snow and like pushing it to his face to like wipe off the tear gas. And there was just this fear, but also this sense of like, we're in it together. I think that's what it is at the end of the day. People are seeing crisis happen, and it is actually calling us closer together and into more bravery and more courage. So yeah, there might be tracking and there might be surveillance, but I think courage models courage, and hundreds of thousands of people are finding that out right now. Jay, what does political history teach us about what Aru is sharing there? Well, I think that courage is contagious. And I think you definitely saw that with what Aru and the Sunrise Movement and the people of Minnesota did in pushing back against Trump and MAGA. And what it really did show us is that, normal people taking to the streets are far more powerful than any of these elites who have coddled to Trump, who have surrendered to Trump could ever imagine. As another famous Moten said, the times they are changing. And the reality is that the mega vibe shift that people talked about a year and a half ago, that caused all this elite surrender to Trump, it is now shifted back. And it has shifted back because of the people of Minnesota. We have a clip from some of the Sunrise Movement material. We played some of this in the lead, but here it is with a full sound, the chanting. And this was at one of the Hilton hotels. As this continues, we see some agents then, though, threatening people in ways that probably violate the Constitution, and they're not hiding it. Here's one agent. This is ICE officer. We believe this was in Maine on January 23rd. It's not illegal to record. Exactly. Yeah, that's what we're doing. Yeah, why are you taking my information down? Because we have a nice little database. Oh, good. And now you're considered a domestic terrorist. So laughter, we're videotaping you. Are you crazy? Aru, what do you tell activists in terms of these type of engagements, especially a time where some have escalated? And I should mention that, most law enforcement training, federal and local, discourages getting into escalation or arguments with individuals. If there's an operation going on, then you might have legal reasons to detain someone and you're engaging. But they generally discourage exactly what we saw there. What sounds like a threat, possibly illegal if acted upon, but also a kind of a churlish menacing of a random person, in this case, seeming to be an American. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, these ICE agents are completely untrained people who have been sent out onto the streets and are currently terrorizing ordinary people. I think it's terrifying. And also the fact that is what is happening is exactly why we need hundreds of thousands of us out on the streets, documenting them, showing what they're doing, and making sure that they are not welcome in any of our cities. And I believe that if we can beat them back in Minneapolis, we can beat them back across the country. And I hope that this becomes a turning of the tides to make sure that ordinary people can, yes, get out and protest, but also that we make sure that the institutions that enable this in the day-to-day, the hotels that house them, the rental car companies that rent out cars, that we stop letting institutions enable ICE to operate. And if we do that, I actually think that we could be able to push back ICE from any city that they try to enter. Che, what do you think about how that works in our politics, where there are policy issues that people debate furiously, sometimes endlessly, and then there are issues that go in the category of values, where if you're completely out of step with them, you're likely to lose every election until you get back in step. And I wonder if you think in the second term, where some of the worst things people warned about Trump that were minimized by all sorts of figures, including elites, that they're actually happening, and the masked agents and the obvious discriminatory approach of this. I've mentioned of the top 3 states you probably know this, where the most undocumented immigrants are 2 of them are Texas and Florida. So, Che, we can debate how to patrol the border, and I think it's a legitimate debate. But everyone can see that Donald Trump is sending these tactics into places that he considers his opponents, not the places where the most undocumented are. Well, politics, you have left and right, but in life and morality and ethics, you have a right and a wrong. What Donald Trump did in Minnesota was just plain wrong. Sending masked men into the streets without warrants, racially profiling people, bringing out grandfathers in their underwear in the snow, harassing, humiliating, and frightening people. That is just plain wrong. And sometimes in life, you just have to stand up for what is right and not worry about the political consequences of it. Now is not the time, to be Mr. Spock. Now is the time to be Captain Kirk, to be someone who goes into emotion, who speaks to our emotions and speaks with a certain moral clarity. That was something that has really been missing in America over the last year or so. But I think we saw some of that in the streets of Minnesota. Che and Aru, as we look at these protests and some of the measurable government reaction, really appreciate both of your time. Thank you very much. A related story coming up. Jeff Bezos spent millions through Amazon on this Melania film, but today the headlines are about him gutting the Washington Post, firing journalists as he cozies up to the administration. We have that story, and another state punching back against these efforts to seize ballots with MAGA threats about the next election. Journalists and experts still poring over the millions of new Epstein files released under the law that Congress forced through over Donald Trump's many objections across the first year of his second term. We're learning new details about how Epstein courted power from elite institutions to top mogul, even doctors, lawyers, tech leaders. It was an array of individuals that gives greater insight into the web he weaved, and maybe how he helped himself stay on the lam for so long. The Wall Street Journal reports on, quote, flirty emails and chummy photos that show an intricately spun web of influence. And then Epstein, who was a big-name dropper and kind of a con man one-ooper, would invoke his connections to then amass the wealthy and powerful friends, which may have helped protect him. Now, these interactions come after Epstein served time for soliciting prostitution from a minor. Peter Attia, who's really known as a longevity influencer, one of these sort of medical gurus, self-proclaimed. He's in the files hundreds of times through 2019, including meetings with Epstein. There's a major businessman, someone who's more behind the scenes, but known to all kinds of folks in media and the Olympics. Casey Wasserman, chair of the 2028 Games, exchanging what sounded like suggestive emails with Ghislaine Maxwell. He has spoken out about that and regretted it. Or take the newly tapped Melania director, Brett Ratner, who already was in trouble and sort of put out of Hollywood for sexual misconduct allegations. He's seen in images with unidentified women. He said one was his former fiancée, but he is in the files. Epstein also kept ties with Silicon Valley's elite. Again, this was in a decade, The Guardian notes, after his publicly known prison stay, the first one. In 2018, he was still going to dinners where you would see Musk, Bezos, the Google founders, Page, and Brin. His conviction as a sex offender had, according to The Guardian, quote, little effect on his ability to move among those billionaire elites. The Democrat who led the successful effort to get these files out discussing the results. I mean, you have some of the most wealthy individuals, tech leaders, finance leaders, politicians, all implicated in some way, having emails about wanting to go to Epstein's island, knowing that Epstein was a pedophile. It's frankly one of the largest scandals, in my view, in our country's history. And there is a demand for elite accountability. Rowana, discussing the problem and the call for elite accountability. There are many layers to this. Some people have defended popping up in the files by saying that they or their institutions didn't know everything. And best we can tell, that's true. Although, as we mentioned, after a certain point in time, it was clear Epstein had that prior criminal offense. But even those institutions are still a part of the problem, even if there's no evidence that they were, for example, themselves actively going to the island. That's important if we legally and otherwise want to get to the bottom of all this, because Epstein was cultivating these relationships on purpose. We talk about the billionaire class and how money works. This is one of the problems that if you care about these victims and what happened and you want to prevent it next time, we need to root out from the bottom. So there's a lot of charity and money that flies around in America. Politico reporting hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations to, yes, a worthy cause, Mount C, but how that was misused by Epstein to peddle influence with correspondence with a surgeon there who then did visit Epstein's island. The doctor saying at one point for Epstein, anything is possible. Now, Mount Sinai might be able to use the money, but they have to understand they were also probably being used. Other files show Epstein benefiting from a direct line to their ER list, last-minute medical appointments, discussions on procuring ambulances for his private island. This is a broad and expansive web. And the misuse of money to gain access is part of the problem, because you have people who take the money because they say, well, this university or hospital needs it. But then you had Mr. Drebstein walking around invoking those associations to continue to build his web. A web that, best we can tell, has still prevented a complete accountability and investigation of all of the individuals involved. We turn to that question and what we're learning from these accounts with Molly Jong-Fast next. My generalized myasthenia gravis was unpredictable and limited what I could do, but Ultomiris is continuous symptom control with improvement in activities of daily living. It has reduced muscle weakness, and Ultomiris is the only long-acting GMT treatment with the freedom of just 6 to 7 infusions per year for predictable routine. I can count on Ultimus may lower your ability to fight infections, increasing your chance of serious meningococcal and other infections which may become life-threatening or fatal. Complete or update meningococcal vaccines at least 2 weeks before you start. If treatment is urgent, you should receive antibiotics with your vaccines. Don't start if you have a meningococcal infection. Infusion reactions may include back, belly, limb, or chest pain, muscle spasms, blood pressure. Millions of Epstein files out. We are still making sense of them. We're joined by Molly Jong-Fast, contributing opinion writer with the New York Times. Molly, I was careful to mention that there's a spectrum here. And there are some people where there has to be a full investigation to what they were doing on the island, why they wanted to go. And then there are these institutions where no one's saying, shut down hospitals, but they got pulled in because of the money game. And so one of the reasons this has fascinated and upset so many people for so many years is the perception that it's not on the level. And all these people circle around these money and power systems. And sadly, it seems that Epstein was able to exploit that. Yeah. And in fact, it's funny because when you look at the Howard Lennox story, he actually donated money, $75,000 in Howard Lutnick's name. That's what we found from the emails. I mean, what's so hard about this whole dump is that there is information that is totally, credible emails that we know exist and are real. And then there are things like tip sheets. And then there are things like draft indictments. I mean, I think the 2007 draft indictment from Florida, which has 20 Jane Does, including multiple women who are 14 and 15 years old, is probably one of the most damning pieces of evidence in this whole thing. So let's key in on that, because one of the reasons that normally the government doesn't release material like this is that it can be misinterpreted. Tip sheets involve writing down what one person could anonymously phone in. So they're at the credibility level legally of like the bathroom stall in middle school or a Reddit page. Zero credibility. The draft indictment you mentioned is high credibility, and we would never normally see that because the normal rules say secrecy first to protect. Right here, it was so bad Congress, as we know, said exception. This is the exception. And the indictment you mentioned was prepared all the way back under Bush DOJ in 2007. It listed a series of, quote, sex crimes that he was accused of. We have this committed against more than a dozen teenage girls over 6 years, and it was not filed. Now, legally, I want to be clear, those are accusations not proven right. But unlike the tip line, it suggests that some prosecutors back then thought they had enough to bring this, and then something changed. They were pushed back while Epstein had hired all these Republican lawyers. Yeah. And ultimately he gets what this Alex Asta deal, which is really a sweetheart deal. And I think what's so appalling about this story, and there are a number of parts that are appalling, right? There's what you see in the emails are people trading favors, people using each other for things that are mundane. And then there are these catastrophic crimes against women. But I think what is the most upsetting about the whole thing is that this happened under 5 different administrations. Republican, Democrat, the FBI did not believe women, and they did not believe more than 1,000 of them.